Marcus Chen stood in the pouring rain outside the corner convenience store, his threadbare jacket doing little to shield him from the November cold. His stomach had been growling for 6 hours straight, a familiar companion during these desperate times. Just 3 months ago, he'd been working as a junior architect at a respected firm downtown. Now, after being laid off when the company downsized, he was down to his last $12 and facing eviction in 4 days. The job interviews had dried up weeks ago. His savings account showed a balance that made him sick every time he checked it. Tonight, he'd walked 7 blocks to this store because gas was 3 cents cheaper, trying to stretch what little money he had left. Every penny counted when you were calculating whether you could afford both ramen noodles and electricity. As Marcus fumbled with his nearly empty wallet at the pump, something caught his eye near the vacuum station. A brown leather wallet lay face up on the wet concrete, partially hidden beneath a discarded coffee cup. His heart rate quickened. He glanced around the poorly lit parking lot, searching for anyone who might have dropped it. The station was nearly empty, just one car at the far pump, and the bored attendant visible through the store's foggy windows. Marcus approached slowly, as if the wallet might disappear if he moved too quickly. He picked it up, rain soaking through his worn sneakers. The leather was expensive, the kind that spoke of a life very different from his current existence. His hands trembled as he opened it, though whether from cold, hunger, or anticipation, he couldn't tell. Inside, crisp $20 bills formed a thick stack. Marcus counted them twice, unable to believe what he was seeing. $500. Exactly $500. His breath caught in his throat. This money could solve everything. He could pay his landlord, buy groceries, keep his phone on, maybe even get his car fixed so he could expand his job search radius. His mind raced through possibilities, each more tempting than the last. But then he found the driver's license. The photo showed a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying temples. Robert Sullivan. The address was local, just 15 minutes across town in one of the nicer neighborhoods Marcus used to drive through on his way to work. There were other cards too, insurance, credit cards, family photos tucked into the sleeves. In one picture, Robert stood with a woman and 2 teenage kids, all of them smiling on what looked like a beach vacation. Marcus stared at that photo for a long time. These people had no idea their husband and father had lost his wallet. They didn't know that right now, a desperate stranger was holding their security in his shaking hands. The rational part of Marcus's brain screamed at him to keep it. Nobody would know. The cameras probably didn't reach this far corner of the lot. He could take the cash, toss the wallet in the nearest dumpster, and solve his immediate crisis. He thought about his own father, who'd raised him alone after his mother passed away when Marcus was 8. His dad had worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to keep Marcus in decent clothes and ensure he could go to college. Character is what you do when nobody's watching, his father used to say, usually while they were doing something tedious like returning a shopping cart to the store entrance instead of leaving it in the parking space. His father had died 2 years ago, but Marcus could almost hear his voice now, cutting through the rain in desperation. Marcus pulled out his phone. The screen cracked from when he dropped it last week. He searched for Robert Sullivan's number, his thumb hovering over the call button. $500. 4 days until eviction. The choice should have been obvious. And yet, as he stood there in the rain with his stomach empty and his future uncertain, Marcus realized that some decisions define who you are in ways that money never could. He pressed the call button and waited, not knowing that this single choice would set in motion a series of events that would transform his life in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The phone rang 4 times before someone answered. Hello. The voice was cautious, the way people sound when they receive calls from unknown numbers late in the evening. Is this Robert Sullivan? Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the cold and the weight of what he was about to do. Yes, who's calling? My name is Marcus Chen. I'm calling because I found your wallet at the gas station on 5th and Morrison. It has your ID and some cash in it. There was a long pause, followed by an exhaled breath that sounded like pure relief. Oh my God, I've been turning my car inside out for the last hour. My wife and I were traced everywhere I went today. I thought it was gone for good. Another pause. You said there's cash in it. Yes, sir. $500. The silence that followed was different, heavier. Marcus knew what Robert was thinking because he'd thought it himself. How many people would actually call? How many would just take the money and run? Where are you right now? Robert finally asked. Still at the gas station. Stay there. Please. I'm coming right now. 20 minutes, maybe less. Robert's voice cracked slightly. Thank you. You have no idea what this means. Thank you. Marcus ended the call and retreated under the overhang by the store entrance, trying to escape the rain. The wallet felt like it weighed 100 pounds in his jacket pocket. He watched cars pass on the street, their headlights cutting through the darkness, and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. That money could have been his salvation. Instead, he was giving it back to someone who probably didn't need it as desperately as he did. The attendant inside gave him a suspicious look through the window. Marcus realized he'd been standing there for almost 15 minutes, not buying anything, just hovering. He probably looked exactly like what he was, a broke, desperate person with nowhere else to go. He turned away, staring out at the rain, and tried not to think about the eviction notice taped to his apartment door. 18 minutes later, a silver Mercedes pulled into the parking lot, moving fast enough to send water spraying from its tires. Robert Sullivan emerged from the driver's side, and Marcus was struck by how different he looked from his license photo. The kind eyes were the same, but there was something else there now. Stress, maybe, or exhaustion. Robert wasn't wearing a jacket despite the rain, as if he'd left his house in such a hurry that he'd forgotten it. Marcus! Robert called out, looking around the parking lot. Hey! Marcus stepped forward, pulling the wallet from his pocket. Everything's still inside. I didn't take anything. Robert took the wallet with hands that trembled slightly. He opened it, checked the contents, and Marcus watched emotions play across the older man's face. Relief, disbelief, something that might have been shame. When Robert looked up, his eyes were bright with moisture that wasn't from the rain. The cash is all here, Robert said quietly. $500. You really didn't take any of it? No, sir. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Robert's voice was thick with emotion. Most people would have pocketed the cash and thrown the wallet away. Hell, I might have done that myself once upon a time. Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he just shrugged. It's your money. It wouldn't have been right. Robert studied him for a long moment, really looked at him. Marcus became acutely aware of his appearance, the worn jacket with a broken zipper, his wet sneakers with the soles starting to separate, the way his clothes hung looser than they had 3 months ago because he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. You're soaked, Robert observed. Have you been standing out here this whole time? It's fine. I'm just glad you got your wallet back. Robert's expression shifted into something Marcus couldn't quite read. You walked here, didn't you? No car. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. There was no point in lying, and somehow he sensed that Robert would see through it anyway. Let me drive you home. It's the least I can do. That's not necessary. I can catch the bus. The buses stopped running this route 20 minutes ago. I know because my daughter takes it. Robert gestured to his car. Come on. You return my wallet intact. Let me do this small thing. Marcus wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain what little dignity he had left. But the thought of walking 7 blocks in the rain made that dignity seem like a luxury he couldn't afford. He followed Robert to the Mercedes, sinking into the heated leather seat with a sigh he couldn't suppress. The warmth was intoxicating after standing in the cold for so long. As Robert pulled out of the parking lot, he asked, Where am I heading? Marcus gave him the address, watching Robert's GPS calculate the route. It was only then that Marcus realized they were heading toward the older, run-down part of town, and Robert would see exactly what kind of building Marcus called home. There would be no hiding his circumstances now. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. Finally, Robert spoke. Can I ask you something? And please, be honest with me. Okay. When you found that wallet, did you think about keeping the money? Marcus appreciated the directness of the question. Yes. I thought about it hard. I'm being evicted in 4 days, and that money would have solved a lot of problems. Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. But you called anyway. My father used to say that character is what you do when nobody's watching. I guess some lessons stick. Marcus looked out at the rain-slicked streets, even when you wish they didn't. Robert pulled up to Marcus's apartment building, and the silence in the car grew thick. The building was a 4-story walk-up that had seen better days, probably in the 1970s. Graffiti covered the lower walls, and several windows were patched with cardboard or plastic sheeting. A flickering streetlight cast uneven shadows across the cracked concrete steps. Marcus felt shame creep up his neck, hot despite the cold. "This is me," Marcus said quietly, reaching for the door handle. "Thank you for the ride." "Wait!" Robert put the car in park and turned to face him fully. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. That $500 you just returned to me, I almost didn't notice it was missing. I pulled it out this morning to pay a contractor, decided to use a check instead, and forgot I'd put the cash back in my wallet." He paused, his voice dropping. "But for you, that money meant the difference between having a home and being on the street." Marcus said nothing. What could he say? The truth hung between them, undeniable and uncomfortable. "I own a construction and development company," Robert continued. "Sullivan and Associates. Maybe you've heard of it." Marcus had. They were one of the biggest firms in the city, responsible for half the new commercial buildings downtown. A knot formed in his stomach. Of course the wallet belonged to someone who wouldn't miss $500. Of course. "Here's the thing," Robert said, and his tone shifted into something more urgent. 3 years ago, my company was on the verge of bankruptcy. We'd overextended on a massive project. Our loans were being called in, and I was about to lose everything I'd built over 25 years. I was standing on the edge of a financial cliff, and I couldn't see any way back up. Marcus turned to look at him, surprised by the raw honesty in Robert's voice. "I had a partner back then, a guy named David Chen. No relation to you, different spelling. We'd started the company together, built it from nothing." Robert's gaze drifted to the rain-streaked windshield. When things got bad, David had a choice. He could have taken his shares, sold them to a competitor who'd been circling, and walked away with enough money to retire comfortably. Instead, he mortgaged his house, pulled every favor he had, and helped me restructure the debt. He saved the company. He saved my family. What happened to him? Marcus asked. Heart attack, 18 months ago. Sudden. He was only 53. Robert's voice cracked slightly. I never got to fully repay him for what he did. His widow got his share of the company, which was only right, but it wasn't the same as being able to look him in the eye and say thank you one more time. Marcus wasn't sure where this was going, but something in Robert's expression made him stay quiet and listen. When you called tonight and told me you'd found my wallet, told me the cash was still there, I almost didn't believe you. I thought it was some kind of scam, that you'd get me to the gas station and try to extort me for a reward. Robert shook his head. But then I got here and saw you standing in the rain, looking like you hadn't eaten a decent meal in days, and you just handed me the wallet without even asking for anything in return. Do you understand how extraordinary that is? I just did what anyone should do, Marcus mumbled. But that's exactly it. Most people wouldn't. Most people would rationalize taking the money, especially in your situation. They'd tell themselves I could afford to lose it, that I'd never even miss it, that they needed it more. Robert leaned forward intently. Marcus, what you did tonight showed me something I've been looking for since David died. Character. Real, unshakable character. The kind you can't fake and can't teach. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He wasn't used to praise, especially not from strangers, and definitely not from successful businessmen sitting in luxury cars. I looked you up while I was waiting for that traffic light, Robert continued, pulling out his phone. Marcus Chen, graduated with honors in architecture from State, worked for Morrison Associates until they downsized 3 months ago. You had glowing recommendations from your supervisor, who said letting you go was one of the hardest decisions he'd ever made. You looked me up. Marcus felt a mix of violation and confusion. How did you even? The internet is remarkably thorough when you know what you're searching for. Your LinkedIn profile, professional registry, even a mention in an article about a sustainable housing project you worked on. Robert pocketed his phone. You're talented, Marcus. You're also unemployed, about to be homeless, and apparently surviving on whatever change you have left. Am I wrong? Marcus wanted to deny it, but what was the point? His circumstances were written all over him, from his worn-out shoes to his hollow cheeks. "No, you're not wrong. I want to offer you something," Robert said carefully. "And before you react, I need you to understand that this isn't charity. This is business. My company just won the bid for a massive mixed-use development on the west side. 3 residential towers, retail space, community center. It's the biggest project we've taken on in 5 years, and we're understaffed in the architecture department. I need someone who can handle the sustainable design components, someone who understands both the structural and environmental requirements." Marcus's heart began to pound. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an interview. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., you will meet with my head architect, go through a working interview where we'll give you a design challenge, and if you're as good as your credentials suggest, then yes, I'm offering you a job." Robert pulled a business card from his wallet, the wallet Marcus had just returned. Fair salary, benefits, and a signing bonus that should cover whatever back rent you owe. Marcus took the card with numb fingers, staring at the embossed lettering. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. "I don't understand. You don't even know if I'm qualified." "You're qualified on paper. Tomorrow we'll find out if you're qualified in practice." Robert's expression softened. "But here's what I already know. You're honest. You're principled. And you make the right choice even when it costs you everything. Those qualities are rarer than talent. Marcus, I can train someone to be a better architect. I can't train someone to have integrity." The rain hammered against the car roof, filling the silence as Marcus tried to process what was happening. His entire life had been circling the drain just an hour ago. Now he was holding a business card that might be his lifeline. "Why?" Marcus finally asked. "Why are you really doing this?" Robert smiled sadly. "Because David Chen gave me a second chance when I needed it most, and I never got to pay him back. Because I've been where you are, staring at the end of everything you've worked for. And because tonight, you proved that even when you're drowning, you're still the kind of person who throws someone else a life preserver." He paused. "Maybe this is me throwing one back." Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat at his small kitchen table, Robert's business card placed carefully in front of him like a talisman, and tried to convince himself that the last few hours had actually happened. The eviction notice still hung on his door. His refrigerator still held nothing but condiments and a half-empty carton of milk that was probably past its expiration date. But now there was also this, a chance impossibly offered by a stranger whose wallet he'd returned in the rain. At 3 a.m, doubt crept in like fog under the door. What if this was a cruel joke? What if Robert had second thoughts and called the whole thing off? What if Marcus showed up at 9 a.m. and security turned him away, laughing at the desperate man who'd actually believed someone would hire him based on one honest act? He'd been rejected so many times over the past 3 months that hope felt dangerous, like touching a hot stove after you'd already been burned. But at 6 a.m., Marcus showered in water that ran cold after 4 minutes because he'd kept the heat low to save money. He put on his only suit, which hung loose on his frame now, and carefully pressed it with an iron he'd bought at a thrift store. He shaved with a disposable razor, nicking his chin in his nervousness. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw someone trying desperately to look employable, someone trying to hide 3 months of poverty and fear behind a thin veneer of professionalism. The bus ride to Sullivan & Associates took 4 to 5 minutes. Marcus spent the entire journey reviewing everything he could remember from his architecture training, running through design principles and building codes in his head like a student cramming for an exam. His stomach churned with hunger and anxiety. He'd skipped breakfast because his last $12 needed to last, and he wasn't sure if this interview would actually happen. The Sullivan & Associates building was glass and steel, 8 stories of modern architecture that gleamed in the morning sun. Marcus stood outside for a full minute, his reflection staring back at him from the polished facade, a thin, scared young man who didn't belong in a place like this. But he thought of his father, of the way he'd worked multiple jobs and never complained. He thought of Robert's words about character being what you do when nobody's watching, and he pushed through the revolving door. The reception area was all marble and darkwood, with architectural models displayed like art pieces in glass cases. A receptionist looked up as Marcus approached, her professional smile in place. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I have an interview at 9. Marcus Chen." She typed something into her computer, and Marcus held his breath, waiting for her to say there was some mistake. No interview scheduled. Please leave. Instead, she said, "Yes, Mr. Chen. You're meeting with Mr. Sullivan and Sarah Martinez, our head architect. Please take a seat. Someone will be down to get you shortly." Marcus sat in a leather chair that was probably worth more than everything he owned. He watched well-dressed people move through the lobby, talking on phones, carrying expensive coffee, living lives of comfortable security that he'd once taken for granted. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Marcus's anxiety ramped up with each minute. This was it. Robert had changed his mind. The receptionist would eventually tell him there had been a mistake. But at exactly 9 a.m., the elevator doors opened, and Robert stepped out. He was dressed in an expensive suit, every inch a successful businessman, and for a moment Marcus felt the gulf between them so acutely it physically hurt. Then Robert smiled, and the warmth in his expression bridged that distance. "Marcus, thank you for coming." Robert shook his hand firmly, ready to show us what you can do. They rode the elevator to the 5th floor, where Robert led Marcus through an open office space filled with drafting tables, computer stations, and walls covered with blueprints and renderings. People looked up as they passed, curious about the stranger Robert was personally escorting. They stopped at a conference room where a woman in her 40s sat reviewing documents. She looked up as they entered, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. "Sarah Martinez, this is Marcus Chen." Robert made the introduction. "Marcus, Sarah runs our architecture department. She's going to be conducting your working interview today." Sarah stood and shook Marcus's hand. Her grip was firm, professional. "Mr. Chen, Robert's told me about your background. Impressive academic record and good experience at Morrison." She gestured to a seat at the conference table, where a laptop was already set up. "But I need to see what you can do in real time. We're going to give you a design challenge, and you'll have 3 hours to present a preliminary concept." Marcus nodded, his mouth dry. This was it. Everything depended on the next few hours. The West Side development Robert mentioned. "We need a 20-unit residential building that meets LEED Gold certification standards minimum, fits on a lot that's only 60 feet wide, includes parking, and maintains affordability for middle-income residents." Sarah pulled up a site map on the screen. "The neighborhood has strict height restrictions and architectural guidelines. Show me how you'd approach this." For a moment, Marcus's mind went blank. It had been 3 months since he'd done any real architectural work. He'd spent that time sending resumes and surviving, not designing. But then something shifted. He looked at the site map, at the constraints and challenges, and felt something wake up inside him. This was what he was good at. This was what he'd trained for. This was who he was beneath all the fear and desperation. "Can I ask questions?" Marcus said. "As many as you need," Sarah replied, settling into her chair like someone prepared to be disappointed. Marcus began working, and as he did, the 3 months of hell fell away. He asked about soil conditions, adjacent structures, solar orientation. He sketched preliminary elevations, calculated square footage, considered traffic flow and natural lighting. His hands moved across the digital drafting tools with growing confidence, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. Sarah interrupted occasionally with challenging questions. "What about drainage? How would you handle the narrow lot width without making units feel cramped? Where's your elevator core? What about fire egress?" Each question was a test, and Marcus could feel her skepticism, her assumption that he would fail. But he didn't fail. 2 hours in, he had a preliminary design that used vertical gardens to meet sustainability requirements, a creative parking solution that utilized a car stacker system, and a facade that met the neighborhood guidelines while maximizing natural light. It wasn't perfect. 3 hours wasn't enough time for perfection, but it was innovative and it worked. Sarah studied his presentation in silence. Marcus watched her face, trying to read her reaction and finding nothing. Finally, she looked up at Robert, who had been observing quietly from the corner. "Is good. The parking solution is clever, and the way is handling the sustainability requirements shows creative problem-solving." "But," Robert prompted, hearing what Marcus heard in her tone, "but has been out of work for 3 months. He's going to be behind on current software updates, current building codes. He'll need time to get back up to speed." She turned to Marcus. No offense. You clearly have talent. But this project starts in 2 weeks, and we need someone who can hit the ground running. Marcus felt his hope crumble. Of course. Of course there was a but. There was always a but. Give him a chance, Robert said quietly. Robert, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but give him 2 weeks. Probationary period. Full pay. If he can't keep up, we part ways professionally. But I think he'll surprise you. Robert's voice was firm. Trust me on this, Sarah. Sarah looked between Robert and Marcus, clearly torn between professional caution and respect for her boss. Finally, she sighed. 2 weeks. But, Marcus, I need to be clear. This is a high-pressure project with tight deadlines. If you can't handle it, I'll have to let you go. No hard feelings, but this company's reputation is on the line. I understand, Marcus said, and he did. This wasn't charity. This was a chance to prove himself, nothing more. But it was a chance, which was more than he'd had when he'd woken up that morning. Robert smiled. Welcome to Sullivan & Associates, Marcus. Let's go handle your paperwork. 3 years later, Marcus stood in front of completed building on the west side, watching the last residents move into their new homes. The autumn afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sustainable gardens that climbed the building facade, exactly as he'd envisioned in that desperate 3-hour interview. The structure had won 2 architectural awards, been featured in 3 industry magazines, and was already being studied as a model for affordable, sustainable urban housing. But Marcus wasn't thinking about awards. He was thinking about the journey that had brought him here, about all the impossible moments that had somehow led to this one. The eviction notice he'd been able to pay off with his signing bonus. The first month at Sullivan & Associates, working 16-hour days to prove Sarah's skepticism wrong. The moment, 6 months in, when she pulled him aside and said, "You've exceeded every expectation I had. I'm sorry I doubted you." He was thinking about his father, who hadn't lived to see this but whose words about character had literally saved Marcus's life. He was thinking about standing in the rain with $500 in his hand, making a choice that felt stupid at the time but had changed everything. Impressive, isn't it? Robert's voice came from behind him. Marcus turned to see his boss, his friend now, approaching with that familiar warm smile. You should be proud. This building is going to stand here for 50 years, maybe more, and it'll always be proof of what you can do. Marcus corrected, what we can do. None of this happens without you taking a chance on a desperate guy at a gas station. Robert laughed. You earned everything you have, Marcus. I just opened the door. You walked through it and ran. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching families carry boxes and furniture into their new homes. Children played in the community space Marcus had designed into the ground floor. Solar panels on the roof gathered energy. Every detail was exactly what Marcus had fought for, what the team had built together. I need to tell you something, Robert said eventually. Something I probably should have mentioned 3 years ago. Marcus looked at him, curious about the serious tone. That night at the gas station, when I got your call about my wallet, I was driving home from the worst meeting of my professional life. We'd just lost a major client, one that accounted for 15% of our annual revenue. I was stressed, angry, questioning every decision I'd made. And then you called. Robert paused, his voice thick with emotion. Finding someone with your integrity, your character, at that exact moment, it reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. It wasn't just about buildings or money. It was about creating something meaningful with people you trust. I had no idea, Marcus said quietly. How could you? You were too busy trying to survive. Robert turned to face him fully. But here's what I want you to understand. You think I saved you that night, but the truth is more complicated. You saved me too. You reminded me what matters. And watching you succeed these past 3 years, watching you grow into one of the best architects I've ever worked with, that's been one of the greatest privileges of my career. Marcus felt his throat tighten. 3 years ago, he'd been standing in the rain, homeless and hopeless. Now he had an apartment he loved, enough money saved that he never worried about where his next meal was coming from, and a career that challenged and fulfilled him. The transformation still felt surreal sometimes. There's something else, Robert continued, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Sarah's retiring next year. She's earned it. 40 years in this business. We need a new head architect, someone who understands both the technical and human sides of what we do, someone with integrity and vision." He handed Marcus the envelope. "I'd like it to be you." Marcus opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a formal offer letter detailing a position he'd never dared dream about: head of architecture at one of the city's premier firms, a salary that made his eyes water. But more than that, it was validation, proof that he belonged here, that his success wasn't luck or charity but something he genuinely owned. "I don't know what to say," Marcus whispered. "Say yes. Then help me build something even better than this." Robert gestured at the completed building. "I'm launching a foundation next year, focused on creating affordable housing across the city. I want you to lead the architectural vision. We're going to do what this building did, but on a scale that actually changes lives." Marcus thought about all the people like him, one bad break away from losing everything. He thought about standing in that parking lot with $500, making the choice that had seemed so foolish. He understood now that character wasn't just about making the right choice when nobody was watching. It was about who you became because of those choices, and what you did with the opportunities they created. "Yes," Marcus said firmly. "Absolutely yes." That evening, Marcus drove to his old apartment building, the one where Robert had dropped him off 3 years ago. It looked the same, still run down, still covered in graffiti, still home to people barely hanging on. He'd driven past it dozens of times since moving out, but had never stopped. Today felt different. He parked and walked up to the building manager's office, where old Mr. Peterson still sat watching a small television. The man looked up, squinting. "Marcus, that you?" "Hi, Mr. Peterson. Long time. Heard you made good. Someone said they saw you in a magazine or something. Architect now." "Yeah. Listen, I want to do something." Marcus pulled out his checkbook, hands steadier than they'd been 3 years ago. "There's a family on the 3rd floor, the Nguyens, Vietnamese couple with 3 kids. I remember they were struggling when I lived here. Are they still in 3C? Mr. Peterson nodded. "Behind on rent. I'll probably have to start eviction proceedings next month." Marcus wrote a check for enough to cover their back rent and 2 months forward. "This is for them. And I want to pay off whatever Mrs. Jackson in 2 AOs. She was kind to me when I had nothing." He wrote another check, then another, working his way through memories of people who'd been gentle when the world was hard. Mr. Peterson stared at the checks like they might disappear. "Marcus, this is over $10,000. "I know, and I'll be back next month. I want to start a fund for people here who are one bad break away from losing everything. Because I've been there, Mr. Peterson. I know what it feels like to count coins for dinner and pray the eviction notice doesn't come." Marcus's voice was steady but emotional. "Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. This is me passing it forward." He left before Mr. Peterson could respond, walking back to his car with a lightness in his chest that had nothing to do with money. This was what mattered, not the awards or the salary or even the new position Robert had offered. This, being able to lift someone else up the way he'd been lifted. Marcus drove home through the city, past the buildings he'd helped design, past the gas station where his life had changed. He thought about calling Robert to thank him again, but he'd done that 100 times. Instead, he called someone else, Mrs. Chen, David Chen's widow, whom he'd met at a company event and stayed in touch with. "Marcus, how lovely to hear from you." "Hi, Mrs. Chen. I just wanted to tell you something. Your husband, David, I never got to meet him, but I want you to know that the kindness he showed Robert, the way he helped save the company when things were bad, that kindness is still echoing. It reached me 3 years ago when I needed it most, and today I was able to pass it forward to others. Your husband's legacy isn't just the buildings his company has created. It's all the lives he touched by being a good man." There was a long silence, then the sound of quiet crying. "Thank you," Mrs. Chen whispered. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that today." They talked for a while longer, and when Marcus finally hung up, he understood something fundamental about how the world worked. Kindness wasn't transactional. It was contagious. One good choice rippled outward in ways you could never predict, touching lives you'd never meet, creating possibilities that hadn't existed before. Marcus thought about that night in the rain, about standing with $500 in his hand in a decision that should have been obvious but wasn't. He'd chosen character over convenience, integrity over survival, and it had seemed like the hardest choice in the world. But it hadn't been hard at all. It had been inevitable, written into who he was by a father who taught him that what you do when nobody's watching defines who you become. And now, 3 years later, Marcus understood that Robert had been right. That decision had changed his destiny, but not in the way he'd expected. It hadn't just given him a job or career or financial security. It had proven to himself that even at his lowest, even when drowning, even when every practical instinct screamed to save himself, he was still the person his father had raised him to be. That was worth more than any amount of money could ever be. That was a real fortune he'd found that rainy November night. And that was what he'd carry forward, paying it forward for the rest of his life. Because character wasn't something you had. It was something you built, choice by choice, moment by moment, especially in the times when it cost you everything to do the right thing. Marcus pulled into his parking space, looked up at his apartment building, and smiled. Tomorrow he'd start his new position. He'd lead projects that changed skylines. But tonight, he was just grateful for second chances, for people who saw the best in strangers, and for fathers who taught their sons that integrity was the only wealth that truly mattered. The wallet had held $500, but the decision he'd made with it had been priceless.